The wind came down from the peaks like a ghost, carrying the first bite of a blizzard. Samuel Hawkins didn't mind the cold. For 12 years, the mountains had been his only company, and they were an honest companion. They didn't lie. They just tried to kill you. His horse, Buck, stumbled on the icy trail, and Samuel knew he had to push on. His saddlebags were heavy with a month's worth of furs, enough to buy powder and salt for the rest of the winter. But the storm was closing in fast, a wall of white death that could bury a man in minutes. Through the swirling snow, he saw it. Pine Ridge, a sad little huddle of buildings clinging to the mountainside. He hadn't planned on stopping. His usual trading post was a day's ride north, but Buck was limping, and Samuel was no fool. He'd take a roof over a frozen grave any day. He rode down the town's only street, a muddy track already turning to ice. The place was quiet, too quiet for late afternoon. Yellow light spilled from the saloon, but no one was staggering out. Then he heard it. Fiddle music, thin and defiant against the wind. It was coming from the church at the end of the street. Its windows were blazing with light. Horses and wagons stood outside, their owners packed inside, ignoring the coming storm. A wedding, in weather like this. Someone was in a powerful hurry to get hitched. He left Buck at the livery, telling the young stable boy to check the horse's front left hoof. The kid, no older than 15, stared at Samuel's wild beard and wolfskin cap. Mountain men were a dying breed, and he looked like a relic from a forgotten time. "That storm's a mean one, mister," the boy said, his breath fogging in the air. Then a grin split his freckled face. "Whole town's at the church. Mr. Morrison's getting married, to some lady from back east. Real pretty, they say." Samuel just grunted. He didn't care about town gossip. He wanted a hot meal and a bed that wasn't a pile of pine needles. He found the inn across from the church, paid for a room, and turned to head up the creaking stairs. And that's when the church doors burst open. Laughter and music spilled out into the snow. The wedding party emerged, a river of dark coats and swinging lanterns. Samuel stopped and watched from the inn's dusty window. The groom came out first, a big man, thick in the chest and shoulders, with a face flushed from drink. James Morrison. Samuel knew the name. You heard it whispered on the trade routes. A man who owned the freight lines, the mines, the whole damn valley. A man who didn't take no for an answer. His hand was clamped on the bride's arm like a manacle. Then he saw her. She stepped out of the church, and the world just stopped. She wore a simple white dress, out of place in this rugged, dirty town. Her dark hair was pinned up, but a few strands had escaped, whipping around her face in the wind. She lifted her head, letting the snowflakes fall on her cheeks, and Samuel's heart felt like it had been kicked by a mule. He knew that face, even after 20 years, even through the falling snow and the fading light. He knew the curve of her jaw, the way she tilted her head. It was impossible. It couldn't be. But it was. Her eyes swept across the street and found him standing in the window. She froze. Her lips parted, forming a name he hadn't heard spoken in 2 decades. Then she did something that shocked the entire town. She ripped her arm out of Morrison's grip. She ignored his furious shout, and she started walking, straight towards him. Her simple dress dragged through the snow, her eyes locked on his. Samuel felt his own feet moving, pushing the inn door open, stepping out into the cold. The wind tore at him, but he didn't feel it. She stopped right in front of him. Up close, she was even more beautiful than the ghost in his memory. Her green eyes, flecked with gold, were filled with a storm of their own. "Do you recognize me, mountain man?" she whispered, her voice cutting through the howl of the wind. "I was your neighbor." The words hit him like a physical blow. Elizabeth Turner. Libby. The girl from the farm next to his back in Missouri. The girl who chased fireflies with him, who fell out of the same apple tree, who swore they'd be friends until the sun fell out of the sky. The girl who had vanished. Disappeared one night after her family's barn burned to the ground, taking her father with it. No one ever saw the Turners again. They were just gone. Libby, he breathed, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. A sad, trembling smile touched her lips. "No one's called me that in a long time. It's Elizabeth now. Elizabeth Morrison." She glanced back at the angry shadow of her new husband. As of about 10 minutes ago. "Elizabeth!" Morrison's voice was a roar. He shoved his way through the crowd, his face a mask of pure rage. Elizabeth flinched but held her ground. Her fingers brushed against Samuel's scarred hand, cold as ice. "I'm glad you're alive, Samuel," she whispered, a universe of unspoken words in her eyes. Then Morrison was there, grabbing her arm again, yanking her back towards him. His voice was dangerously smooth. "You'll have to excuse my wife. The excitement has overtired her." Every instinct in Samuel's body screamed at him to tear her away, to put his fist through Morrison's smug face. But they were in a town, surrounded by people, and she was his wife. The law was on his side. Morrison dragged her away, but she kept looking back at Samuel, her eyes pleading, until the swirling snow swallowed her whole. Samuel just stood there, the cold seeping into his bones, his mind reeling. Libby, alive, and married to that man. He had come to Pine Ridge to escape a storm. He was just now realizing he had walked right into the heart of one. Sleep didn't come that night. The storm hammered the town, but the tempest inside Samuel's mind was worse. He sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the memory of Libby's face burning behind his eyes. Libby, who had been the sun in his dusty Missouri childhood. He remembered the night of the fire, the smell of smoke, the orange glow against the black sky. The next morning the Turners were gone. He'd spent months searching, riding from town to town, asking after a widow and her young daughter. But it was like they'd been erased from the earth. He eventually gave up, assuming they had perished somewhere on the trail west. The grief had been a stone in his gut, a wound that never quite healed. He'd fled to the mountains to forget, but you can't outrun your ghosts. And now one of them was sleeping in the same town, under the roof of a man who looked at her like she was a prize he'd just won at a county fair. A soft knock on his door made him jump. It was the stable boy shaking snow from his coat. "Your horse is fine, mister. Had a stone bruised his frog. He'll be right as rain by morning." Samuel tossed him a coin. As the boy turned to leave, Samuel stopped him. "You were at the wedding." The boy nodded. "Whole town was. Mr. Morrison, he's a big deal, owns nearly everything. Threw a big feast. Food brought all the way from Denver." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "The bride, she only got here 2 months ago, with her mother. Real refined lady, folks said." "Her mother?" Samuel asked, his senses on high alert. "Died last week," the boy whispered, glancing down the empty hallway. "Lung fever. Happened real fast. That's why the wedding was so rushed. Mr. Morrison, he offered to take care of Miss Elizabeth. Paid for the funeral and everything. Some folks say it was a great kindness." The boy met Samuel's eyes. "My ma says it was a trap." A chill that had nothing to do with the storm snaked down Samuel's spine. "Why a trap?" The boy shuffled his feet. "My ma does the laundry for the Morrison house. She says Mr. Morrison's got a mean streak, especially when he drinks." He swallowed hard. "And his first wife? She didn't last long. Married 2 years, then she fell down the stairs. Broke her neck. That's the official story anyhow." The stable boy looked Samuel straight in the eye. "Ma says she saw the bruises on Mrs. Morrison before the funeral. Bruises that don't come from a fall." The boy left and Samuel shut the door, the wood feeling flimsy against the weight of what he'd just heard. Elizabeth hadn't just lost her mother. She'd been left alone, vulnerable, and Morrison had swooped in. It wasn't kindness, it was predation. The story about the first wife, Margaret, echoed in his mind. A convenient fall down the stairs. Bruises that didn't match. It was a pattern. A terrifying, deadly pattern. He paced the small room like a caged wolf. He couldn't leave. He couldn't ride away and leave Libby in the hands of a man who might have already killed one wife. He had lost her once to fire and tragedy. He wouldn't lose her again to a monster in a fine suit. He had to know more. He had to find out what really happened to Margaret Morrison. The next evening, Samuel pushed through the swinging doors of the saloon. The air was thick with smoke, whiskey, and the sound of men celebrating their boss's wedding. Morrison's men, miners and freight drivers, all drinking on his coin. Samuel took a seat in a dark corner, nursing a whiskey, and just listened. "To Morrison!" a big miner shouted, sloshing beer onto the floor. "May his new bride be prettier and tougher than the last one." A round of ugly laughter followed. Samuel's hand tightened around his glass so hard he thought it might shatter. Two men at the table next to him were talking in low, drunken voices. "She's a classy one, this new wife," the first one said. "Not like Margaret. Margaret had a mouth on her." Talked back. "Aye," the second one slurred. "Funny thing about Margaret, she was always so clumsy, always walking into doors." He winked. "Then she got real clumsy one night at the top of the stairs." "Morrison's got his eye on being governor when we get statehood," the first man continued, oblivious to Samuel's cold fury. "Needs a fancy wife for that. Someone who knows which fork to use. But he best hopes she knows how to keep her mouth shut too." Samuel finished his whiskey in one swallow, the burn doing nothing to quell the fire in his gut. He stood up and walked out before he did something he couldn't take back. Outside, the cold air cleared his head slightly. He stared up the street at the Morrison house, a grand two-story building that loomed over the rest of the town. Its windows were lit, casting warm squares of yellow onto the snow. A prison with glass bars. He couldn't just sit here. He couldn't wait for history to repeat itself. He began to walk, his boots crunching in the snow, with no destination in mind. He just needed to move. He found himself back at the church. It was dark and silent now, a stark contrast to the night before. As he stood there, a side door creaked open. A figure slipped out, wrapped in a dark shawl. Even in the gloom, he knew it was her. She seemed to be heading for the small cemetery behind the church. Samuel hesitated for only a moment before following, keeping to the shadows of the buildings. He watched as she knelt before a fresh grave, the mound of earth still raw and new under a dusting of snow. Her mother's. Her shoulders were shaking with silent sobs. The sight broke something inside him. This wasn't the fiery, laughing girl he remembered. This was a woman cornered, grieving, and utterly alone. He stepped out of the shadows. "Libby?" She gasped and spun around, her eyes wide with fear. When she saw it was him, the fear was replaced by a wave of exhaustion and despair. "Samuel, you should go. It's not safe for you here." "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice low and firm. He came closer. In the faint moonlight, he could see it clearly now. A dark, ugly bruise blooming on her cheek, poorly hidden by her hair. Rage, cold and pure, washed over him. "He did that to you?" It wasn't a question. She looked away, pulling the shawl tighter around herself. "He was angry I spoke to you. He has a temper." "A temper?" Samuel's voice was rough. "Libby, this is more than a temper. The stable boy told me about his first wife." Her head snapped up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "They told me she was ill, that she fell." "They lied," he said gently. "Everyone in this town is either bought by Morrison or terrified of him. They're letting him get away with it." "There's nothing to get away with," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "I am his wife. It is his right." "It is not his right to hurt you," Samuel said, his own hands clenching into fists. "This isn't a marriage, Libby. It's a cage, and the door's about to lock for good." She finally broke. A sob tore from her throat. "What can I do? I have nothing. No one. My mother is gone. He owns this town. He owns the sheriff. He owns everything. Where would I go?" He took a step closer, his heart aching for her. "You come with me." She stared at him, her expression a mixture of shock and a desperate flickering hope. "To the mountains? Samuel, I can't. I wouldn't survive a week. You survived the fire that killed your father. You survived 20 years alone. You are stronger than you think," he insisted. "Let me help you. We can disappear. He'll never find us." She seemed to consider it for a fleeting second. He saw the old Libby, the girl who would climb any tree and ford any stream. Then the light in her eyes died, replaced by a deep, hollow fear. "He would find us," she said, her voice flat. "He would hunt us down. And he wouldn't just hurt me. He would kill you, Samuel. He's done it before." Before Samuel could ask what she meant, her eyes widened in terror, looking at something over his shoulder. He spun around. Standing at the edge of the cemetery, half hidden by a large pine tree, was a man. He was watching them. As soon as he was spotted, he melted back into the darkness. "Who was that?" Samuel demanded. Libby was shaking uncontrollably. "One of his men. He has me watched. He knows, Samuel. He knows I met you here. Her voice dropped to a frantic whisper. You have to leave. Now. Forget you ever saw me. It's the only way you'll stay alive. She turned and ran, stumbling through the snow back towards the house, back towards her cage, leaving Samuel alone in the graveyard with the cold moon and 1,000 new questions. What did she mean he's done it before? Was she talking about his first wife? Or something else entirely? Something older? Samuel didn't move. He stared into the darkness where the man had been. Morrison didn't just have a temper. He was careful, calculating. He had spies. This was worse than he thought. This wasn't just about escaping. To save Libby, he would have to do more than run. He would have to tear Morrison's entire world down around him. The next morning, the tension in Pine Ridge was so thick you could cut it with a skinning knife. Samuel sat in the corner of the inn's dining room, forcing down a plate of greasy eggs. The innkeeper, a balding man named Silas, was polishing glasses behind the bar, but his eyes kept darting towards Samuel. Heard there was some trouble up at the Morrison place last night, Silas said, his voice a little too casual. Mrs. Dobbins, the housekeeper, was saying the new bride fainted during dinner, had to be carried to her room. Shame. Such a delicate thing. Samuel knew it was a lie. Libby hadn't fainted. Morrison had likely dragged her from the room after his spy reported their meeting in the cemetery. The innkeeper was fishing, trying to see what Samuel knew. Was he just a gossip, or was he reporting back to Morrison too? In this town, you couldn't trust anyone. Samuel needed an ally, someone who wasn't on Morrison's payroll. He thought of the whispers in the saloon, the talk of a crooked business deal, a robbed shipment, an insurance payout. Where there was money, there was a paper trail, and where there was a paper trail, there was a man who kept the books. He found an old ex-cavalry scout named Tom Brennan, sharpening a knife behind the livery. Brennan was one of the few people in town who didn't owe Morrison anything. He had a government pension and a healthy distrust of authority. Morrison's freight shipment, Samuel said, getting straight to the point, the one that was robbed up in Devil's Canyon a few months back. What do you know? Brennan spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. Smelled rotten from the start, he grunted. The robbers knew the route, knew the schedule, knew exactly which wagon had the payroll. It was an inside job. Or more likely, Morrison robbed himself. Why? Cargo was insured for double its value, Brennan said, not looking up from his knife. Collected a fat pile of cash from the insurance company in Denver. If you want proof, you won't find it. The men who did the job are probably at the bottom of a canyon themselves. He paused, then slid his eyes toward Samuel. But if a man wanted to find the numbers, he'd need to talk to Clarence Headley, Morrison's bookkeeper. Scared little rabbit of a man. Lives in that small house down by the creek. That was the key. Headley, the man who held all of Morrison's secrets. Samuel waited until nightfall. A new layer of snow had fallen, muffling all sound. Headley's house was small, with a single lamp burning in the window. Samuel knocked. The door opened a crack. A thin, terrified face peered out. What do you want? I need to talk about James Morrison, Samuel said, his voice low but firm. I have nothing to say, Headley stammered, trying to close the door. Samuel put his boot in the way. They say his first wife fell down the stairs, Samuel said, his eyes boring into the bookkeeper's. They say his latest shipment was robbed. I think it's all connected. And I think you know it too. I'm not here to hurt you, Headley. I'm here to help Elizabeth Morrison. Her life is in danger. At the mention of Elizabeth's name, something in Headley's face changed. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with a flicker of guilt. He pulled Samuel inside and quickly bolted the door. The room smelled of ink and old paper. You don't know what he is, Headley whispered, wringing his hands. He's a monster. Show me, Samuel commanded. Trembling, Headley went to a loose floorboard beneath a threadbare rug. He pulled out a hidden ledger. He makes me keep 2 sets of books, the bookkeeper explained, his voice shaking. This is the real one. It's all in there. The insurance fraud, the bribes to the sheriff, the payoffs. His voice trailed off. Payoffs for what? Samuel pressed. Headley wouldn't meet his eyes. After the first Mrs. Morrison died, there were questions. The doctor was hesitant to sign the death certificate. Morrison paid him a great deal of money, a gift, he called it, to help with his discretion. The same doctor who had likely treated Libby's mother, the one who pronounced her dead from a sudden, fast-moving lung fever. It was all a web of lies, held together by Morrison's money and the town's fear. "I need this book," Samuel said. Headley looked like he was going to be sick. "If he finds out I gave it to you, he'll kill me. He'll hunt me down." "He won't find out," Samuel promised. "The midnight stage to Denver leaves in an hour. You need to be on it. Take your family. Disappear." Tears streamed down the little man's face, but he nodded. He pushed the ledger into Samuel's hands. "He keeps another secret ledger," Headley whispered, his eyes wide with a deep, primal fear. "A private one. I've only seen it once. It's not about money. It's personal. He keeps it in a safe behind the portrait of his father in his study." A private ledger. What secrets could be worse than fraud and bribery? Samuel tucked the book inside his coat. He had the proof he needed to ruin Morrison financially, to expose him as a cheat and a briber. It might be enough to get the law involved, at least the federal marshals from Denver. It might be enough to set Libby free. He left Headley's house and started back towards the inn, his mind racing. The wind was picking up again, and the moon was hidden behind a thick bank of clouds. The town was plunged into an inky darkness. Then he smelled it. Smoke. He looked up. A malevolent orange glow was pulsing against the night sky. It was coming from the edge of town, from the Morrison house. But it wasn't the main house that was burning. It was the small guest house out back, the one Morrison had moved his new bride into after their argument, to keep her separate, to keep her locked away. Samuel didn't think. He ran. He sprinted through the snow-covered street, his lungs burning, the heavy ledger bumping against his ribs. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was no accident. The fire, the locked room, it was happening again. Morrison wasn't just trying to scare her. He was trying to erase her. By the time Samuel reached the Morrison estate, the guest house was engulfed in flames. A crowd had gathered, a pathetic bucket brigade trying in vain to fight the inferno. Morrison was standing on the lawn in his nightshirt, shouting orders, playing the part of the concerned husband. But Samuel's eyes weren't on him. They were on the second-story window of the guest house. And then he saw her, Libby, pounding on the glass, her face a silent scream of terror. Trapped. The fire was roaring up the walls, licking at the roof. She didn't have minutes. She had seconds. "The door is locked," someone shouted. "We can't get in." Samuel saw a fire axe lying near the main house. He grabbed it and charged towards the burning building without a second thought. The heat was a physical blow, scorching his skin and searing his lungs. Smoke poured from the windows in thick black clouds. He didn't hesitate. He kicked in the front door and plunged into the choking darkness. Inside was a vision of hell. The heat was unbearable, the smoke so thick he couldn't see his own hands. He could hear the roar of the fire all around him, the groan of timbers about to give way. He wrapped a piece of his shirt around his face and started climbing the stairs, guided only by instinct. The upstairs hallway was a tunnel of fire. He found her door, the wood hot to the touch, and swung the axe. Once, twice. The wood splintered. On the third swing, the lock shattered, and the door burst open. Libby was on the floor, coughing, nearly unconscious from the smoke. He scooped her into his arms. She was terrifyingly light. "He locked me in," she gasped, her voice a raw whisper. "He told me he wanted me to be safe. Then he locked the door from the outside." "I know," Samuel grunted, turning to carry her out. But the way was blocked. The staircase had collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. They were trapped. He looked around frantically. There was only one way out. The window. He carried her to the window, smashed the glass with the back of the axe, and looked down. It was a 15-foot drop into a snowbank. He looked at Libby. Her eyes were closing. She was fading fast. "Hold on," he told her, his voice more commanding than he felt. He took a deep breath of the toxic air, swung her out the window, held her for a second, and let go. He saw her land safely in the deep snow below. Then the roof above him groaned, a sound of final surrender. He didn't have time to think. He just jumped. He landed hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him, his head slamming against something frozen beneath the snow. The world exploded in a flash of white, then faded to black. He woke to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of a woman crying softly. He opened his eyes. He was in a clean bed. Sunlight streamed through the window. Libby was sitting in a chair beside him, her face smudged with soot, her eyes red from weeping. She was alive. Dr. Whitman, a man with kind eyes and a weary expression, was changing the bandage on Samuel's head. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Hawkins," the doctor said. "Another minute in that fire and you'd be dead. You have a concussion and a few cracked ribs, but you'll live." "Libby," Samuel croaked, his throat raw. "She's safe," the doctor assured him. "Thanks to you. I'm keeping her here, under my care." His eyes hardened. "When you carried her out, everyone saw. The bruises on her arms, the marks on her throat. And when I examined her, I found older injuries. This has been going on for a while." The door opened and the sheriff came in. Not the local lawman Samuel had seen in Morrison's pocket, but a U.S. Marshal, a tall, grim-faced man named Elias Vance. He'd been in town investigating the freight robbery and had seen the whole thing. "Mr. Hawkins," Vance said, his voice deep and steady, "Clarence Headley found me at the stagecoach station last night. He gave a full confession and handed over a certain ledger." He looked down at Samuel. "Your actions last night corroborated his story. We have James Morrison in custody." Relief washed over Samuel, so powerful it almost made him pass out again. It was over. "He's being held on charges of arson, attempted murder, and insurance fraud," the marshal continued. "He won't be getting out." But Libby shook her head, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling with a fear that went deeper than bruises and fires. "It's not over. It will never be over." "What do you mean, Elizabeth?" Marshal Vance asked gently. She looked at Samuel, her eyes filled with a secret horror. "The fire, it was just like the other one, 20 years ago, the one that killed my father." Samuel sat up, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. The room went silent. "What are you saying?" he asked, though a terrible, unthinkable suspicion was already dawning in his mind. "When my father died," Libby said, her voice barely audible, "he had been arguing with a land speculator from the east who wanted to buy our farm. My father refused. The man made threats. The night of the fire, I saw him riding away, his face lit by the flames." She took a shaky breath. "I was just a child. I didn't know his name then, but I never forgot his face. The man who wanted our land, the man who argued with my father." She looked from the marshal to Samuel, her eyes wide with the terror of a memory finally understood. "It was him, Samuel. It was James Morrison." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. James Morrison. The man who had haunted Libby's life wasn't a recent monster. He was an old one. He hadn't just stumbled upon a vulnerable widow in Pine Ridge. He had orchestrated the tragedy that had made her vulnerable in the first place. Marshal Vance's face was grim stone. "Are you certain?" "I'll never forget him," she whispered. "When I saw him again, here in Pine Ridge, I thought I was losing my mind. He didn't seem to recognize me. He called himself Morrison, not Morris, the name he used back then. He was charming. My mother was sick. We were desperate. I thought it was a coincidence, a terrible, cruel coincidence." It wasn't a coincidence. It was a hunt. Morrison hadn't just murdered her father for a piece of land. He had waited patiently for 20 years. Perhaps he'd been tracking her family, waiting for the right moment to reappear. When he found her in Pine Ridge, alone and grieving, he saw his chance to finish what he started, to acquire her the same way he acquired land and mines, through force and fear. He wanted to possess the last living witness to his first murder. And his private ledger, the one Headley had mentioned, suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. It wasn't about money. It was a collection of trophies. "His study," Samuel said, his voice raspy. "Headley said he keeps a private ledger in a safe, behind the portrait of his father." Marshal Vance didn't hesitate. He dispatched 2 deputies immediately. They returned an hour later, their faces pale. They carried a small, leather-bound book. It wasn't a ledger of numbers. It was a diary, Morrison's diary, and it was filled with his meticulous, chilling accounts of his crimes. The freight robbery, the accidental death of his first wife, Margaret, after she discovered his past. And there, in an entry dated 20 years prior, was a gloating description of a barn fire in Missouri, a stubborn farmer who wouldn't sell, and a clever escape. He even described a young girl with green eyes watching from her window as he rode away. He had been hunting her entire life, but the diary contained one more bombshell, a final, cruel twist. In the back, tucked into a leather sleeve, was a yellowed newspaper clipping. It was an obituary for Libby's mother, but the date on it was from 6 months ago, 4 months before she and Libby had even arrived in Pine Ridge. The clipping was from a Philadelphia paper. It stated that Mrs. Turner had died peacefully in her sleep. But that's not possible, Libby stammered, her hand flying to her mouth. My mother died here. Last month, Dr. Whitman. Her voice trailed off as she looked at the doctor, whose face had gone white. The woman Morrison brought to me, Dr. Whitman said slowly. The one he introduced as your mother. She had lung fever, yes, but her resemblance to you was slight. I assumed it was the illness that changed her features. It wasn't her mother. It was an imposter, a sick, hired woman Morrison had used to complete his trap. He had isolated Libby from the world, feeding her lies, controlling her reality, all to corner her and force her into marriage. Her real mother had likely been dead for months, and Libby had been grieving a stranger. The depth of his evil was staggering. It was a web woven over decades, with a patience that was truly monstrous. Just then, a deputy burst into the room. Marshal, it's Morrison. He's escaped. Chaos erupted. The local sheriff, the one on Morrison's payroll, had been guarding his cell. He was found knocked unconscious. Morrison was gone. He's not running, Samuel said, throwing the blankets off and forcing himself to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his side. He's not going to leave town. He's coming for her, to finish it. Marshal Vance nodded grimly. We'll set up a guard here at the doctor's office. He won't get within 100 yards. But Samuel knew Morrison better than that. He wouldn't come straight at them. He was a predator who preferred traps and ambushes. He would try to lure them out. They didn't have to wait long. A young boy, the stable boy who had first warned Samuel, came running, his face white with terror. He was holding a piece of paper, a note. It had been nailed to the door of the livery. The message was simple. The Mountain Man, Main Street, high noon, come alone, or the next fire I set will be the doctor's office. It was a classic dual challenge, a final, public confrontation. But Samuel knew it was a lie. Morrison wasn't a man of honor. He was a snake. This was a trap. He'll have men hidden, Samuel said to Vance. Snipers in the windows. My thoughts exactly, the marshal replied, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. But we have to answer the challenge. If we don't, he'll burn this place to the ground, with all of us in it. A grim smile touched Vance's lips. But he's not the only one who can set a trap. Libby grabbed Samuel's arm, her eyes pleading. Don't go. Please. It's what he wants. Let the marshal handle it. He called me out, Libby, Samuel said, his voice gentle but firm. This is between him and me now. It's the only way it ends. He looked at Marshal Vance. Let's give him the show he wants. As the town clock tower began to chime noon, Pine Ridge was a ghost town. Every door was shut, every window shuttered. But behind those windows, the whole town was watching. Samuel walked into the middle of the street, his cracked ribs screaming with every step. The stolen ledger was still tucked in his coat, a heavy reminder of everything at stake. Across the street, 50 yards away, James Morrison stepped out from behind the saloon. He was freshly dressed, a long black coat hiding whatever weapons he carried. His face was a mask of smug hatred. You, Morrison spat, his voice echoing in the silent street. You cost me everything. My wife, my business, my good name. You never had a good name, Samuel called back, his hand hovering near his own pistol. You just paid people to say you did. I should have killed you the moment you rode into my town, Morrison snarled, but I'll settle for now. Time seemed to slow down. The wind kicked up dust devils in the street. Samuel could feel the eyes on him from every window, every rooftop. He knew Morrison's men were out there, sights trained on his heart. He also knew Marshal Vance's deputies were out there too, hidden, waiting. Morrison's hand moved. It was a blur of motion. Both men drew and fired at the same instant. The world exploded in thunder. A bullet tore through Samuel's side, spinning him around. He dropped to one knee, the world wavering in his vision. But his own shot had found its mark. Morrison staggered back, clutching a bloody shoulder, his gun clattering to the ground. It wasn't over. Morrison let out a roar of fury and pulled a second gun, a small derringer from a hidden pocket in his coat. He raised it, aiming for Samuel's head. Before he could fire, two more shots rang out, not from Samuel, but from the rooftops. One of the marshal's deputies hit the derringer, sending it flying. The other hit Morrison square in the knee. He collapsed, screaming, not in pain, but in pure, frustrated rage. In that same instant, other shots erupted from windows up and down the street. Morrison's hidden snipers were being taken down, one, by the marshal's men. The trap had been sprung, but not on Samuel. Marshal Vance walked out into the street, his pistol smoking. He stood over the pathetic, wounded form of James Morrison. "It's over, Morrison," Vance said, his voice cold as a grave. "Justice has found you." Deputies swarmed the street, cuffing Morrison and dragging him away, his empire of fear and blood finally in ruins. Libby ran to Samuel's side, tears streaming down her face as she helped him staunch the bleeding. "You fool," she sobbed, a sound that was half grief, half overwhelming relief. "You stubborn, brave fool." Samuel looked up at her, a weak smile on his face. "Learned it from a girl who used to climb apple trees back in Missouri." He reached up and touched her cheek. "It's over now, Libby, for real this time." They both looked up as the deputies led Morrison past them. For a moment, Morrison's eyes met Libby's. There was no remorse in them, only a cold, bottomless hatred. Then he was gone, a monster being dragged back to the shadows. In the silence that followed, surrounded by the quiet, watching townspeople, Samuel knew they couldn't stay in Pine Ridge. The ghosts here were too loud. Their future, if they were to have one, was somewhere else. It was back in the wild, honest cruelty of the mountains. Weeks later, with the spring thaw turning the mountains green, Samuel and Libby rode out of Pine Ridge for the last time. He was still healing, but his strength was returning. She rode a sturdy mare, her back straight, her eyes clear for the first time since he'd met her. The town came to see them off, their faces filled with a quiet respect. They had seen a great evil brought down, and they had seen two survivors find each other in the wreckage. They rode in silence for a long time, heading up into the high country, leaving the last traces of civilization behind. The air grew thin and clean, smelling of pine and wet earth. At the top of a ridge overlooking a vast, untouched valley, Samuel reined in his horse. He looked at her, his heart full of a feeling he thought had been buried forever. "No regrets?" he asked. She looked out at the jagged peaks, the endless sky. A true smile, the first he'd seen, lit up her entire face. It was the smile of the girl he remembered, the smile he had thought was lost to the world. "My only regret," she said, turning to look at him, her green eyes shining, "is that it took us 20 years to find our way back to each other." He reached across and took her hand. They were scarred, both of them, by fire and by monsters, but they were not broken. They were survivors. And here in the vast, silent wilderness, they were finally home. The story of the monster of Pine Ridge became a legend in those parts, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. But the story of Samuel and Libby, well, that was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story of survival and long-awaited justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next strange tale.